The subject of this clinic is optimum usage of layout space, or how to get more railroad in a given area without crowding. Thank you for coming. My name is John Allen. Space is a feature few of us model rails have enough of to satisfy our layout desires. Even the largest of model pikes would be too small to economically justify a prototype railroad's existence. With the average-sized home railroad, the need to make a mountain out of a molehill can be challenging. The smaller the available room space, the more critical becomes the usage of each square inch to help the railroad appear logical and realistic. Are there many overlooked devices and techniques to enlarge a layout or give the appearance of enlargement within a given area? I think so. Many space-saving deceptions are already in regular use within our hobby. Excellent, though commonly used and understood ploys, such as enlarging an area by using a smaller scale or using smaller equipment in a larger scale, whether this be narrow gauge or old-time railroading, where the prototype uses lighter and smaller equipment, or perhaps reverting to trolley or interurban modeling, where the short trains and sharp curves of the prototype can be most accurately reduced to scale in a model. These stratagems won't be dwelt upon at this clinic. These commonly understood devices will be ignored now for the chicaneries less employed by our miniature empire builders. I doubt if any completely new idea can be introduced here that hasn't been used before. It would be nice if we could buy a barrel of expandable space as manufactured here and double or triple our available room area. Since this factory hasn't yet gotten into volume production, we will just have to settle with using our cleverness to get the most out of what space we have available. There are two possibilities to overcome this problem. First, stratagems to make a layout larger in a given room area, or how to use room space most efficiently. And secondly, ploys to make that layout area appear larger than it is. We'll now take up the first stratagem of how to design the maximum layout area into a room. In order to compare various schemes for fitting a layout into a room, we should adopt some standard requirements which satisfies our need for accessibility both for operation, construction, and maintenance. Suppose for this discussion we decide that the minimum width aisle space which we will allow is 2 feet, and the maximum reach from this aisle or excess area will be 2 feet. Then we can design various layouts within a given room and compare their efficiency in using the space. We might also add that to make the problem less easy, that the door must swing inward rather than the more fortunate direction outward. These may not be your own personal requirements, nor are they mine. My own are for a wider minimum aisle and a maximum reach from an access space be 36 inches to any scenery, 30 inches to any track, and 24 inches to any turnout. I happen to be 6 feet tall and would recommend that for each inch you are taller or shorter than that you add or reduce these maximum distances by 1/2 inch. However, for these comparison studies now, we will reduce these requirements to only 2 feet for purpose of illustration. It always seemed a shame to me that the model magazines and publications give so much recommendation for the poorly proportioned and space-wasting 4x8 layout. I suppose this is due to some illogical reasoning based upon the irrelevant fact that plywood and wallboard sheets happen to be constructed to that size. On the right, in yellow, is a diagram of a 4x8 layout, and on the left, a diagram shown in green is the smallest room, 12 by 8 foot, that such a layout can be permanently positioned if we adhere to the reasonable requirements just decided. It is unfortunately common for publications to print layout plans without always indicating which edges can be put against a wall. Oftentimes, study of these plans show that if one is to maintain such a layout, several, if not all the edges must allow for an outside access, and the true room requirements for such a layout are often double the area indicated. To truly compare the usage of space, any edge that cannot be put up against a wall should include a 2-foot addition along that edge as mandatory layout area. This is the principal reason why island layouts are the most wasteful of space and seldom show up well in comparison with peninsula or walk-in type railroad. The 4-foot dimension on a 4 by 8 pike cannot be worked upon by reaching over, and so if permanently positioned, usually becomes an island layout, thus requiring a 2-foot access completely around, thus making the minimum area possible 8 foot by 12 foot. If we make the railroad movable so that it can be pulled away out from the wall, we could probably get away with an 18-inch space all around for access, which would allow a more comfortable 3-foot aisle when it was against the wall. When we place a permanently fixed 4 by 8 layout in a corner, we have a 2 by 6 foot space indicated by the code in red that we cannot maintain. I discount any tendency to consider getting up on top of a well-detailed model to make repairs, as most impractical, though it might be done while under construction. If we place the 4 by 8 pike against the wall in the center of the room, we still have a 2 by 4 area unreachable. You may notice by the color code chart that the corners are in white, indicating two-way reach access. This has little added value, and two-way reach access usually indicates a wastage of space in the layout design. Read and try to remember the color code chart in the lower right corner, for it will soon be absent as the need for more chart room increases. Since for a permanently installed pike, a 4 by 8 can't be placed against a wall, we'll drop these two impractical positions for a permanent railroad, leaving the only position in the railroad it should occupy, the center. If we will trade 8 square feet of double reach white code space in diagram number 1 and make the layout a peninsula rather than the more wasteful island, we can exchange it for 16 square feet of single reach space, still having full access, as in diagram number 2. With the space wasting 4 by 8 foot pike, out of a room area of 96 square feet, we could use only 32 square feet, with double that in aisles, or 64 feet, and so only 33% of the room area is available for a railroad. With the 4 by 10 foot peninsula layout, we can increase our layout area to 40 feet and increase its proportion of room area to 42%. This is still far too wasteful to tolerate. One of the signs of maturity, that's a nice sounding way of just saying you're getting old, is that one uses his brain more and body less. There is a growing tendency of experienced model railroad planners to build for themselves a walk-in type railroad with no stoop or crawl under necessities for entering the access area, at least that area from where all operation takes place. Oftentimes, one starts a railroad construction while relatively young, and one bends easily. But as time progresses and the railroad gets well along, the aging process take place, and us poor old men don't squat so unconcernedly anymore. Railroads have been torn out for this one feature alone. There is no real problem in putting a drawbridge or removable section across the doorway, only to be positioned down while actually operating. Our leader, Whit Towers, uses a lift bridge across the entrance to his railroad most effectively. Since the island or peninsula design pike is too wasteful of our room space, let's try the reverse and make a walk-in around the room design, as in diagram 3. Unless a drawbridge or removable track is put across the doorway, this will require a point-to-point track plan for all but the smallest scales or sharp curved trolley lines. We have now pushed up our layout area to 60 square feet and reduced our access to 36 square feet. Our double reach footage is reduced to 4 feet, and our layout proportion of the room area is up to 63%. This C-shaped pike is one of the most efficient designs for a medium-small railroad, but since in this case we have more than the necessary aisle space width, we can do better. We are now beginning to run out of chart space, so before I remove the color code chart in the lower right corner, I will read it off for those who are too far back to read the small type. The green color is for the room area. The yellow is a single reach from the aisle on the layout. The white is the layout, double reach from the aisles. Red is the layout, too far to reach. Blue is a layout, covered or removable access. And orange is layout, stacked, too level. Since our aisle space is wider than our minimum requirements, we can project an 8-foot peninsula into the aisle area, as in chart number 4, still having full access and stay within our minimum width aisle requirements. Though if one has visitors, they won't be able to pass easily. We now increase our layout area to 68 square feet and the proportion of the room area to a respectable 71% of the area. This is as much as can be designed in an 8 by 12 foot area if we use only one level and have all walk-in access space. This design would accommodate a very good out and back without any obstruction, even of a removable bridge across the doorway. You are probably beginning to see a precept developing. I jokingly refer to this principle as John's rule, since I see very little evidence that anyone else uses it, though I have noticed that a great many of John Armstrong's excellent plans show much thought along the same lines. For those lucky enough to be so far back as not to be able to read the small type in this infamous rule, I'll quote, "The maximum usage of room area for a permanently fixed single-level layout is when the access or aisle area edge has a maximum bordered by layout and a minimum bordered by a wall or other obstruction. This is further improved if the layout area reached requires up to the maximum distance from these aisles with a minimum reachable overlap from two access areas." I never tried to put this into words before, and I'm not sure I'm doing it understandably now. Well, let's move on and get some more layout area into this 8 by 12 foot room. We might take a tip from the prototype and use the airspace above one railroad yard trackage and make a second level above, as in number 5 on the top left. We have plenty of mainline distance to run out from a lower yard and to climb an easy 10 to 14 inches to a higher yard, and this elevation should be adequate for easy construction and maintenance. This area is in orange by our code, and the layout area is able to be pushed up another 16 square feet to 84 square feet, and the proportion to the room area is up to 87%. If we decide not to use the airspace, we can still enlarge our layout area if we are willing to make a duck under for maintenance and possibly operator control, as in upper right, figure 6. We can exchange 8 feet of double reach layout, white, of diagram 5 for 16 feet of single reach, yellow, in diagram number 6. And our layout area jumps up to 76 square feet, and are proportioned to 79% of the room area. Open access area pits, such as this, can be easily hidden so as to appear to be continuous from the operating aisle, even though not actually covered. Here is an area at Great Divide, very much unfinished in the buildings, which my good friend Jim Finley has popped up to illustrate an open access pit. The area of this uncovered access is a generous several square feet, and though the camera is positioned at a normal eye level of a standing adult, it's very difficult to see any break in the scenery or in the buildings. It looks as though they continue on from front to rear. This is very easy to do by building the back edge of the access space as building fronts. This can just as well be done in open country. Here, there's quite a large access area right behind the trestle, between the trestle and the mountains painted upon the backdrop. This uncovered access space is on my old railroad, abandoned some 15 years ago. Access pits can of course be covered and removable for construction and maintenance without giving any hint to the fact that the opening isn't a fixed part of the railroad layout. If these are small and reachable from the aisle, they can easily be lifted out and reinstalled for the occasional construction and maintenance chores. Scenery such as being lifted from below here has some flexibility and few damageable details. When dropped back into place, the edges are easily hidden by shrubbery or natural rock fissure, so that there is nothing to show the crack. In this case, there are no small and delicate details to be damaged, nor building foundations that would pull away from the ground. From a bit of flexibility, so the trap is light and yet easy to drop into the position of the opening contour and adapt itself by gravity to lie with little gap at the crack. Areas such as this can often be used to allow a little open ground type space, so sorely needed on so many model pikes. It's often hard to resist filling all the area in a small layout, solid with structures or track, but quite often a vacant lot would do more for a railroad scenery than another well-detailed structure. However, such covered access spaces need not be lacking in track or holding delicate structures. Track can very easily go upon these openings, provided the base is made rigid and precise, with keying so that the rail will align when in place. My main passenger yard has such an opening right through a series of tracks. This can easily be removed by hauling the cars away when maintenance or construction necessitates. Electrical continuity is no problem if spring contacts are installed to provide a contact pressure when the cover is in place. No need for wired junction cables. It would be impossible to construct and maintain by reaching from the aisle to such a depth as this without an access pit. This is the only access pit I have that carries track, but alignment of the track gives little more bump than any other track gap. The station is far from completed. If we cover the 2 by 4 foot access pit, as indicated by the blue in figure 7, we get another 8 feet of layout in the room, and our layout area jumps up to 84 square feet, with only a bare 12 square feet for aisle access. And the proportion to the room area now jumps to 87%. This should be about a minimum aisle space practical for this room. It would be impractical to have a lift-out access section this large and deep into their layout. It might be possible to get underneath and lift it out for someone in the aisle to carry out or hold until you need it again, but it would be extremely difficult to replace and align from below, and almost impossible to reach over a 4-foot layout area from the aisle to put it back into position. Such an access pit can be constructed to align itself accurately and requires no help from another person to use it. If the large section deep back into the layout is too large to handle easily, construct the pit cover with a hinge at the top so that it can fall open much as the door of a drop-leaf table. Then you alone can crawl under, release the clasp, open it, and stand in the open access for construction or maintenance. When through working, drop down below the scenery, swing up, and close the trap door of scenery, and fasten the holding clasp. The trap door is the dark area just to the left of the track work, in the foreground. Here the trap is closed and the scenery in place. It may be well to make the trap cover into 2 sections so that you can stand in one to scenic and detail the other, as well as the surrounding landscape. It's difficult to detail the scenery on the trap while it is hanging in a vertical position and while you are standing in the same access space. If the 2 by 4 access space shown covered in our last diagram was built into 2 drop-type covers, approximately 2 by 2 foot each, either could be worked easily from the other pit while in place, or the hinges can be removed for easy removal to detail on the workbench. These door-like access covers will align themselves every time quite accurately and are quite easy to open and close. A more unusual, though equally accurate self-aligning cover can be built as in this city area at Port. As in the drop door one, the pit is too far removed from the aisles for handling by a lift-out. Rather than the simply constructed rock slide of the other hatch, this area is composed of buildings needing much detail work and hence comfortable conditions for the hours of construction. Here I decided upon using a sort of vertical lift such as used in a prototype lift bridge. These will align themselves when dropped back to position extremely accurately, just as the tracks on a vertical lift bridge aligns when down. Headroom was sufficient so that when the covered lift is up, I can stand comfortably and work from a generous hole to take care of the surrounding scenery. The individual buildings on the lift, too, were constructed in comfort on the workbench and installed into position from below while the lift is in a raised position. Here is another angle showing the lift section in a raised position. There is a stop at the bottom of the holding supports so that the buildings can't travel far enough to touch the ceiling, and a keyhole for a nail to keep it raised safely in position without danger of falling. It takes only a few seconds for the elevator to be raised or lowered. Well, let's approach the ultimate and double-decker yard area as before. This adds another 16 square feet, and our layout area becomes larger than our 96-foot room area to a surprising 100 square feet, and 105% proportion to the room area. This is certainly an advantage over the miserable 32 feet area possible in the room with the 4x8. The purpose in this clinic isn't to study railroad track design, but I would have little trouble designing several good schemes in this area with large radius curves and, if wanted, gentle grades. Though this plan would fit our earlier established requirements, I would personally increase the entrance access width by 6 inches to a 30-inch aisle and reduce the width of the covered access to 18 inches. I would also round the corners and probably give some curve to the aisle edges. There is no reason an access space must have straight edges and square corners. Curved layout edges flowing with the trackage, besides being more graceful, can allow a little more reach when it is needed. Sharp corners, either projecting out or in, are a waste, and I very rarely use them. When I do, it's for a reason. Control boards can also be fitted into a concave curved edge of layout just as well as a square-cornered one, and prevent loss of access from projecting out into the aisle. This concludes the first part of our clinic. That is, how to use your space most efficiently and design the most layout area into a given room. Assuming you have used your layout space area to advantage, we'll now take up the second part of the clinic, that is, ploys to make a layout area appear larger than it is. If your railroad is well along, you may have passed the point where you can use some of these chicaneries, but perhaps others can still be adapted, which will help guide the spectator. I suppose the most overlooked design advantage to get a lot of scenery into a little space is the common tendency to think flat. Layout plans are usually drawn in 2 dimensions. Distances on this plan are considered carefully, but the value of the space vertically is so often overlooked. This view is looking up Hellengone Gap. There's an old joke about the Flatlanders' first visit to Colorado. Golly, if Colorado was leveled out, it would be larger than Texas. New York City is large too, but not by measurement of its land area. Can't we modelers benefit by enlarging our pikes by vertical contrivance, either by severely steep-sided ground or high-rising building, or multiple-level duplicity? Of course we can. A multiple-storied office building or factory has much more space than a one-floor building, and a cliff has much more area than the ground space it occupies. Enlarge your pikes. Think 3D. Before we leave the subject of access space, we might think about the advantages of making an aisle into a canyon, modeling the scenery to the floor, and considering the floor the river surface, much as might be seen along the spectacular stretches of the Colorado River. The sharply vertical cliffs won't interfere with your reaching distances, and if you like to model granite, here's your chance to do it in a few acres. It may not be practical to carry your scenery from floor to ceiling in every aisle, but perhaps you can find one aisle or end of an aisle to try for this scenery increasing cliff. This is called Giant Canyon for obvious reasons. These canyon cliffs can be spectacular, and even more so from a worm's eye view, which won't be seen unless you like to look up while lying on the floor. Try to break the sharp drop-off edge line just beyond the nearest track by dropping the scenery in spots from down far below the track in a draw or gulch, and build a high bridge or trestle to carry this track nearest to the aisle. This steel trestle spans such a ground depression at Grant Cliff. A few ground plan inches of scenery can become a surface area scenery measured in feet. Always attempt to make the track crossing these gulches appear to have taken the least difficult and inexpensive way to hurdle the ground. If there was a less costly and better way for the rail to have been placed, your scenery choice was bad. This is Ryan Gulch, spanned by the highest wood trestle on the railroad. Another kind of canyon can sometimes be used in which the bottom can be walked upon, yet modeled, as in this view, up Devil's Gulch. In this case, the dirt in my basement was left unexcavated, and the cement layer of about 3 inches poured right upon the ground and modeled as it set. The regular scenery method was later installed from this level, climbing up to make the canyon walls. The rough cement floor was painted much as regular scenery, and though climbing and walking over it wears it off on the raised surface a bit, it seems to withstand the erosion for several years between paintings. Of course, it becomes impractical to put a lot of detailed trees and structures upon these walked-upon surfaces, but a bit of less detailed areas will enhance by contrast those more intensely modeled places. Real water can flow down this creek when desired and will go out a floor drain in a small depression just below the floor level where the gulch joins the floor surface. There is a lot of scenery ground surface in this entrance to Devil's Gulch, yet the floor space occupied is not large. When the tracks cross one of these small canyons running back into the scenery from the aisle, as in this worm's eye view of French Gulch, the various tracks of the main line, as they loop around the room at different elevations, should be positioned so that the nearest is at the lowest elevation and each one behind stepped up the mountainside. Regardless of the schematic positioning of this trackage, it's best to have the various elevations of the track step up from front to rear, cutting and filling each right-of-way in an efficient, engineered manner. Here is the same area from a normal adult standing eye height. I like to use various types of bridges to cross such an obstacle as though perhaps built in different eras or by different railroad crews, economizing or splurging as the railroad's prosperity dictated. Trackage adjacent at different levels never looks as double track and looks less congested. Here, 4 elevations of main line, bunched together on a mountainside with only 2 feet from the aisle to the wall. High buildings also give a large surface area while occupying small plan space. A large structure, such as against the wall and right, requires no more floor space than a small two-stall engine house. But this large building allows a spur service track to logically allow many carloads during operation. A low industrial building of one or two floors of the same plan area usage would be hard put to absorb the contents of one freight car. High buildings, especially when near or against a wall, can step up in height as they recede in the distance and relieve in appearance the smallness of a layout area, without taking much, if any, plan space. One of the problems in scenicking a model railroad is to get the ground line up to eye level before painting sky. The high buildings in the scenery is about the only logical method to do this unless you have a railroad elevation near chin height. Unfortunately, high buildings take up a lot of time making windows, but unless you're in a hurry, they are worth it. In the country area of the railroad, the ground should be made to rise steeply to eye height, eliminating the difficulty of trying to paint a backdrop in perspective below eye elevation. No matter where you are on this planet, the sky won't go down to below the horizon line, and that's eye height when you're in the railroad room. It's much easier to paint clouds or sky or distant mountains than to paint canyons or buildings, which change their perspective as you walk around the railroad room. Though the 8x12 room used in our diagram studies required no support posts, these are often encountered in our railroad room areas. Here is one in my railroad room disguised as a rock pinnacle with a small building for a restaurant and lookout points for travelers to dine and view the scenery while the train waits, a la old-time Harvey houses on the Santa Fe. Try and make a room obstruction appear as though a desired feature rather than ignore the obstruction or hide it apologetically. A moving cable elevator lifts the passengers up to the building here at Eagle's Nest and makes the post more interesting. Room corners jutting out into the room can be most difficult to hide by a mere sky. I have two of these protruding corners. One is disguised by a high mountainside, and the other, shown here, has the railroad's tallest building hiding this corner as it rises up to touch the ceiling sky. It may not make the corner an asset, but it helps hide the offending projection and takes very little plan space. Another little space saver is using one building or station to service track from two positions on the line. This could be two faces of a single factory, schematically separated for spurs, or in this case, 2 points on the line needing small stations, but at different elevations, so that one station serves both, even with different station names for each elevation. This cross-junction station was built for my railroad and was featured in a model railroad article by Jim Finley. When your layout is against a wall, the space beyond the last visible track can very effectively use a diorama to help enlarge the appearance of the scene. This forced perspective starts with full-scale buildings or scenery, and then with perspective and reducing the scale as it recedes until the modeling is at a much smaller scale. The backdrop painting continues the scene. Always be careful that the painting and the room lighting match both as to shadow and color. Small villages and open country can use this diorama technique also very effectively. Here one is high up on the top of a modeled mountain. To the right is the unfinished small village of Angels Camp. Being near eye height, low buildings can be used to decrease the scale and bring the feeling of more space than the 2 actual inch depth of room available for the town. Along with the buildings being constructed in forced perspective, the stock pen, trees, and other details decrease in size as they drop back into the scene. The little signal tower between the 2 tracks is to full HO scale. The buildings then seen in this little diorama are not completed. Here's another incompleted diorama in a corner at a fueling stop at the town of Aiken. The few inches beyond the main line track starts with buildings near full HO scale and rapidly decrease in scale to a small dummy freight yard beyond the buildings. These little dioramas scenes are fun to play around with and should be used more often in model railroading to help make a room seem larger. I suppose the space enlarging device most appreciated by visitors is my usage of mirrors to enlarge a room. These are not usually noticed right away, but seem to bring a ripple of excitement when this feature is first realized. Here, looking up Giant Canyon, can be seen the largest mirror in the room, 6 feet wide by 2 high, and placed reflecting and doubling the scenery in the upper right between the dark, burned-over forest area and behind the red rock Devil's Post pile at right foreground. The clouds drift across this mirror and also upon the backdrop sky behind upon the wall. Part of these clouds are painted upon the mirror to match those both on the wall backdrop behind and the reflection of clouds painted upon the distant opposite far wall reflected by the mirror. Here is a close-up of this same scene. The blending of the clouds at the top hides the mirror edge and allows the clouds to partially cover and block out the distant mountains and clouds on the opposite wall. Here is the same area while the early construction was being done, with the mirror in position and the start of the painting of clouds, both upon the backdrop and above and upon the mirror. To be sure to decide and install the final room lighting in your railroad room before painting any backdrop, for the lighting should match between the painting and the room lighting, and it will be difficult for the two to match after the painting is done. With mirrors, the reflection image should have the same lighting, both in direction and color, to coincide with the foreground bordering the mirror edge. Here again is the mirror as the scene, in the scene as it looks after completion. You may notice that the track seems to go through the tunnel and progress up into the mirror into the distance. The tunnel and cut hides the second train image, mirrored as a train goes through the cut. With the parallax of your 2 eyes giving third dimension, the illusion is even stronger as a train goes through than by viewing the slide. A mirror is a marvelous way of pushing a hole through a confining wall and opening up a room. Here is another mirror spanning between 2 high buildings on the distant left, helping to make a small stub-ended yard appear larger, while opening up a wall backdrop to enlarge the space visibly. Clouds and smoke again match between those painted behind the mirror and those reflected in the mirror of scenery toward the throat of the yard trackage. This earlier view shows how the tracks join together at the mirror so as to appear to continue on through. Buildings become enlarged to double their constructed depth without using a single inch of layout space. The track must touch the mirror at right angles to prevent an unrealistic jog. This view of Jim Findlay in the Access list-out shows that one shouldn't position any mirrors so that they reflect unwanted duplication of operators or unmodeled railroad scenes from any position from viewing aisles. If a train parallels the mirror, the duplicating reflection would be almost as distracting from realism as seeing yourself or another model rail in the mirror while looking at the scene. Mirrors can't just be put anywhere. They must be planned. Here is another view of this yard seen at Great Divide. The smoke from the building stack bordering on the left attempts to hide the top edge of the mirror, but the reflecting painting in the mirror is still too light to match the painted backdrop behind, but should when the finished reflected backdrop painting is completed. It would be impossible to match the two if you switched around the lighting from time to time. Light it well and then leave it when you paint the scenery. Here is a scene taken on my former Gorre and Daphetid line, abandoned some 15 years ago, showing a burning building backed up against a mirror to double its size, and the smoke rising from the building painted upon the mirror. The track stub ends against the mirror, and the various tanks are duplicated, as well as hide the main line from duplication as the train rolls by. A small red light bulb glows in the embers of the burning building and flickers slightly. Large mirrors aren't the only type to use. Here is a small one under a building only blocked in, which crosses over a small city street. The trolley turns the corner, but the stationary car traffic continues right through and beyond the wall in appearance. Notice the truck in the street has a different color on the mirror side and has two back ends, so that the traffic will stay on its proper side of the street. Here is another see-through building using a mirror to reflect the modeling across the room to open up the confining wall and appear to enlarge the space. Here, the Port Plastics old factory building borders the right edge of the mirror, and the new addition, the left, while a high runway conveyor crossing hides the top. The traveling crane is only constructed by half, and the mirror completes the image. You can get a lot of apparent space with a 1/16 inch mirror when it is used right. This building actually occupies less than a square foot of planned space. Here is the same building being blocked in during construction. Note that the tracks touching the mirror are always either at right angles or parallel to the mirror surface when the two come in contact. Here is much the same scene when the building and track is completed. It would be rather difficult to switch out the car either under the crane or inside the door of the building. These dummy tracks were put in for scenic effects rather than operation. Though the spur next to the modern building is operational, as well as the coal track next to the old building, which is unloaded by the traveling bucket, which can unload coal either from freight cars or from barges. I suppose that one of the most interesting features that attract comments from visitors is my large parking lot, stretching out under my turntable and engine house yard. This window, looking into the underground lot, which seems to be vast, actually is quite small, but with the aid of mirrors on all four sides, gives the appearance of a large underground storage area, with hundreds of cars stretching out in all directions into the distance. Since this feature is below the regular operating railroad surface, no plan area was needed for its space. When we move in to take a closer look, we see a couple of miniature people looking into the parking lot. It usually intrigues the more observant visitors why these figures are not reflected back into the scene, as are the cars and ceiling lights, as they double and redouble back into the scene. Incidentally, there are only 2 actual cars in this scene. The rest are mirror images. Thank you for your patience in sitting through this overly long slide talk, showing some ploys which might help you either enlarge the actual size of your railroad in your room space or make that area seem larger than it really is. I hope some of these devices will be of help to you. Thank you.